Hello, everyone. Today we are going to jump into our first lesson on verbs, the real verbs. Up until now, we've been dealing with the des verb, which, is very special. It has its own rules for how things are conjugated and sentence structure and whatnot. And we've done that a, wa, be, des pattern, for a few weeks. And now we're getting into everything else. And you're going to see that if this is your first time getting into verbs, some of these concepts are going to seem really crazy to you. And then some of the things you're going to say, oh, that's neat. Because while Japanese verbs introduce different sections, different areas of complexity, there are some things that, for example, if you are an English native speaker, we don't have to do in Japanese. Things that are required for English verbs that we don't have to do here. So it's a little bit good, a little bit bad. And it's not a complicated topic, but there is a lot of information. And so I just want to let you know, if this is your first time getting into verbs, your goal today is not to understand everything and retain everything. If you do, great. But there's a good chance that you're going to say, all right, I kind of get this. And then 30 minutes later, you might say, wait, I forgot a lot of it. And that's the thing with conjugations, is it involves a lot of spelling changes. You're changing the spelling in the same way that we have, eat, ate, eaten kind of thing, eats in English. So we do have, by the time you see this video, it's probably available, but we do have a new conjugation schedule available in Renshu, so you can practice these really easy from your dashboard. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. You can check out the stream that's inside of Discord if you're here, with us live while we're looking at it. And before we jump into verbs, there's a really important topic that we're just going to kind of touch on. You've probably heard about this, in that with Japanese, there's, a lot of politeness or lack of politeness built into the language. In English, it might be that we use different words depending on who we're talking to. And in Japanese, it is whether or not you're speaking at a polite level or at a casual level, it is ingrained in the actual conjugation of the verbs. And so it's something that you can't escape. And as the page notes, this is not 100% correct. It's correct as far as a beginner is concerned. There are two levels of politeness when dealing with verbs. There's actually four. And the two other ones are ones that you usually don't learn until you're a couple of years in. They're the honorific and the humble version of verbs. And so, as far as you're concerned at this point, there's just two. And we have the polite verbs and then the casual verbs. Now, this is something that I see people, make mistakes with when they're first getting started, in that they feel like they have a choice in which one to use. And here in the Renshu lessons, for the majority of the lessons for the next several weeks, we are sticking to polite. And this is typically what textbooks do as well. We're going to learn the polite language first, and then we will switch over to casual or short form later on. And here's the thing with polite and casual. So what do these actually mean? It might be easier for you to think of polite form as standard Japanese. It is your baseline Japanese. And what that means is polite works in any situation. You can use polite when talking to someone you've never spoken to before. You can use polite when talking to someone at the convenience store, talking to a teacher. You can even use it if you're talking to a loved one, a friend, a family member. Polite covers everything. And with polite, it is not polite in the sense that when we think of English, polite is, may I please have another slice of pizza, sir? There's not a sense of stiltedness to it. It's not a, oh, I don't want to appear so stiff, I'm not going to use polite form. That's not the case. Casual form, in the same way, is not what you may think of in the sense of casual. And what I mean by that is that, we have different personalities, each of us. And when we talk, some people talk in a more relaxed manner than others. Someone might go and say, hey, how are you doing? Or how are you today? And then someone else might say, hey, how are you guys doing? And casual does not mean friendly in the sense that you think, oh, I want to appear friendly. I'm a relaxed person, and so I'm going to use casual. That will show people how relaxed I am, how friendly I am. Now, that's not the case. Casual has a specific place in Japanese. We'll talk about it later. And if you use casual when you shouldn't, it can come across as rude. And so what I usually tell people is you don't use casual verbs unless you've been exposed to them enough to know when you should and shouldn't use them. Polite, on the other hand, you're good with. You can use polite, you're not going to make a mistake. You won't use polite and a Japanese native speaker will say, oh, you use polite, you really offended me. But that's not going to happen. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, so we're going to stick with polite forms for the remainder of the year and probably a few weeks after that. So let me give you one of the first good things about verbs. We have in English, first person, that's I or we. Second person is you. Third person is he, she, they. We have singular, we have plural. So, we have I play, he plays, they play. It changes depending on who's doing the action. In Japanese, that's not the case. This is one of the nice things. Japanese verbs conjugate regardless of who the subject is or what the subject is. It doesn't matter. So if we were saying it in English, we would say I eat, he eat, you eat, they eat, we all eat. It's the same verb coming up. And for those of you that still have problems with some of the English spellings on some verbs, Japanese has very, very few special cases. In fact, they have two. Now, they are two of the most common verbs, so they're ones you really need to know, but there's only two irregular verbs in the entire language. And we'll be getting to those in just a couple of minutes. So let's take a look at how we build these, and then we're going to practice with a whole bunch of verbs. Today we're going to talk about a couple of the most basic polite forms. It's the present positive, as in I eat, and then the present negative, as in I don't eat. And a lot of the polite forms of verbs use what are called stems, verb stems. Now, a verb stem doesn't exist in in English, so there's no comparison to be made here. But let's first take a look at what verb stems are. There's something that's used, a whole bunch. And the way that you make a verb stem is determined by what type of verb it is. Now we're about to jump into the spot where I think by the end of this, you will all understand it. As in you will think, I heard what Michael said and it makes sense. But you probably will not remember all of it. You'll understand it, you probably won't remember it. Or you can remember it, but it takes, 30 seconds to think of each, the type of each verb. That's fine. That's normal. That's what everyone does. So don't worry about that. Typically, verb stems, before verb stems, the type of the verb is done by the last character that's in the verb. So I'll show this to you at the end of the lesson. You can study these right now, today, inside of Renshu. You can practice these. They're kind of tucked away in a little special spot. but at the end of the lesson, I'll let you know where you can go. And then we will have specific conjugation schedules available very soon for you to use. Now, I don't think there's been a spot for questions so far, but just to let you know, if you have a question, you can type into the channel whenever you want. You don't have to wait for me to stop talking or wait for me to say, hey, are there any questions? Just toss it out there. Okay, like I said, we do have a couple of irregular verbs, but all other verbs fall into two categories. Ichidan or Godan. Now there's a chance you're familiar with half of each of those words, the ichi and the go. They're both the numbers, ichi being 1 and go being 5. Additionally, that second half of the word dan, I'm trying to think of a word, you're probably familiar, if you've heard of it, of the word kaidan. Does anyone know what kaidan means? They're common in many houses. Stairs. I heard someone say stairs. Thank you. The user voices are not inside of the recording, but yes, stairs. And what's stairs if not a set of steps? A set of stairs, a set of steps. And so Ichidan means 1 step. Godan means 5 steps, and irregular. Now, Ichidan verbs will always end in ru. They will always end in ru. So for example, right in front of us, we have taberu. And Ichidan steps are really easy because it takes 1 step to, make the stem. So let's take a look at it. Here we have taberu, and we have that ru sitting on the end of it. Now, like I said, all verbs that end in ru, all Ichidan verbs end in ru. However, there are some ru verbs that are not Ichidan. This is the one tricky spot in verb conjugation. And again, it's not something that you're going to just absorb immediately. It's knowledge. It's not comprehension. It's knowledge. So it takes time for that knowledge to get into your head and stay there. So don't worry about it. But with these Ichidan verbs, they're really nice because they take 1 step. To make the stem, all you do is drop that ru. And so taberu, the verb, the stem of it is tabe. Taberu is the verb, the stem is tabe. That's all. So let's, actually, we're not going to practice it quite yet. We're going to go through a little bit more, and then we're going to actually practice making these stems. So just to summarize, I'm going to type into the channel, some ru verbs are Ichidan. And all you have to do is drop the ru. Some ru verbs are Ichidan. And in that case, you drop the ru and you have your stem. That's all there is to it. Let's jump into the next category. The next category are the Godan verbs. Now, these are not words that I made up or that English speakers made up to make this easier. This is how they're actually referred to, in a Japanese dictionary. Godan verbs are basically everything else. If it doesn't end in ru, it's Godan. So that's a whole bunch of verb endings. If it doesn't end in ru, it's Godan. And you might have inferred from the rule above, some ru verbs are also Godan. So before we continue, let's try and think about all the different endings that verbs can have. So if you don't mind, let's take about a minute, and in the channel, let's not use kanji. Even if you know it, let's not use kanji because we're keeping it simple. Think of all the verbs you can that don't end in ru. And here's what I'd like you to do. Type it out. Use either hiragana, or if you don't have Japanese installed, you can just use the romaji, and then put the very simple Japanese definition next to it. So for example, hanasu, to talk or to speak. So what other ones? I want to see if we can hit every ending. There's 8 or 9 of them. Let's see how many of them we can get. So the example on the screen has kaku, which is to write. So I'll go ahead and just copy that into the Discord so we have it in one place. So we have a verb ending in su. We have a verb ending in ku. What other verbs can we think of that have different endings? Nomu, to drink. Excellent. Shinu, to die. Some of you might be thinking, that's a weird one to bring up, but I'll tell you why that's not the case in just a minute. What else do we have? Asobu, to play. There we go. So there's a new ending. If you'd like some hints, we haven't gotten one ending in gu yet. We don't have one that ends in u. We don't have one that ends up. There's one. You, to say. Isogu. Danny, what does isogu mean? To hurry. Yes. We don't have one ending in su. Su yet. Motsu, to hold. Sure. Or matsu, to wait. Matsumotsu. Tatsu, stand up. Of course. And I think that covers all of them. We might be short one, but don't worry. We're going to look at them. Now, you might notice that... Actually, we'll get to that in just a second. So, we have a whole bunch of these, and these are all Godan verbs. Now, I'm going to mention just a few of them to you. Like I said, there are some Ru verbs that are Godan verbs as well. For example, kiru, which is to cut, is a Godan verb. It ends in Ru, but you conjugate it just like the rest of the Godan verbs. So they do exist. One more. Shiru, to know. These are both Godan verbs. So let's keep going. Like I said, they're called 5-step verbs. Now we're going to see why they're called that. They're called that because they use all 5 vowels when you're actually conjugating them. Now, with the vowels, it's the vowels I'm speaking of are the I, E, U, A, O, or, in Japanese, it's the A, I, U, A, O. However, you're going to see this is one of the few times when you're learning Japanese that Romaji actually steps in and says, oh, this makes this much clearer. Most of the time that's not the case, but here it is. And with verb stems, we're not going to worry about any of, all 5 A, I, U, A, O. It sounds complicated, but it actually isn't. Now, if you look at all the verbs we just typed out before, we had one ending, and I'm going to type them out real fast. We had one ending in u, we had one ending in su, and gu, and there was a mu in there, there was a nu, of course there's ru, ku. What is the vowel sound that's similar among all those, or the same? There's one vowel sound that's the same, and what is it? It's that u sound. Now, you're not able to actually say it's the u, as in the Japanese u, because that character is not actually inside of it. That's why, in this case, it's really nice to think of it in Romaji. So with u, we have, I'm going to type these out real fast. I'll just give you a few. There we go. You can see all of these have that u inside of them. And most of them have a consonant in front of them, but they're all still the u sound. If you're looking at your hiragana table, these all come in the same row, typically. They're all in the u, row. Kaki kuke ko, hahi fuhe ho. They're all the u's. And all the Godan verbs are going to have this u. Every verb ends with that u sound, every single verb. And so to make the stem, here's what you do. And you can see this on the screen. We're using kaku as our example. We take that u sound, we rip out the u, we swap it out for an e, or the I sound. So to say it in English, we're removing the u sound, we are adding the I sound. So let's practice that. This is a big step. This is a really big step. So real fast, now it's on the screen, but it might seem obvious to you, but I still want you to think this through in your head, or if you're participating in the channel, I'd like you to type this out. If we have ku, what are we changing it to? We need to change it to the I sound. What does it look like? It's ki. Exactly. Thank you. And I'm going to take this moment to answer a question that hasn't been asked yet, but is often asked. If you're looking at my screen share, or you're looking at this lesson, this streaming, the character that's appearing in everyone's Discord that they just typed, the key, and the character that's on the Renshu screen, the key, are different. Do you see that? They're both the same character. They're both key, but they're written differently. In fact, not only are they written differently, they have a different number of strokes when you're writing them. The key that's appearing, presumably, at least in my Discord, has 3 strokes. 2 horizontal strokes, and then that one longer stroke that kind of comes from the top and then as a hook, almost like a spoon. Whereas here in Renshu, we've got that 4 strokes. We've got the 2 horizontal ones, but then that 3rd stroke is broken apart. The first one's kind of like a hook, almost like a fishing hook, and then there's 1 extra stroke at the bottom. You might be wondering which is correct. The answer is they're both correct. The difference is that, and yes, depending on your Discord and if you're using it on your phone or on Linux or Mac or whatever, it might change. But you will see this pop up. And if you can't see it, I guess if you can't see it, then it's hard for me to show it to you. But you will see this happen. The one that's separated, that's the way that it is written. And Renshu defaults to this. We call it the textbook font, because this is the way that it will appear in textbooks in Japan. The Japanese students are learning it this way. However, thank you, Kusuguru. The way that you see it with the connected one is, I'm not sure if it's more common. It probably is. But you see it more often on the internet. Fonts that are more common on the internet tend to have that hooked. However, they're both legit. They're both correct. It just depends. You'll see one or you'll see other. So it's good to know that they both exist. Okay. So going back to our topic, to make the stem of kaku, we just drop that u sound and replace it with the e sound. So kaku becomes kaki. Ao is changed to ai. And you can see it jumping from the red to the green coloring down below. The u changes to an I. Motsu changes to mochi. Kiru changes to kiri. Now, as I said, ru verbs are sometimes Godan and sometimes Ichidan. So is there a trick to remembering these? Unfortunately, there's not. There's not a system for it. It's just something you have to remember. That's all there is to it. And I'll go ahead and throw this out because, languages are not made. They develop naturally over time. And it seems like it was made to punish us foreigners, but there's actually 2 kiru verbs. One means to wear, and it is Ichidan. One of them means to cut, and it is Godan. So we have, with this one, you can't look at them and say, oh, it's this or that. You just have to remember, and this is where kanji helps out when you start learning kanji later on. Kanji makes it more obvious which one it is, and then you say, oh, it's the one that means to cut. Okay, it's Godan, or it's Ichidan. But it's something that you just have to remember. Machimas is a Godan verb, but the actual verb is matsu. How to make it that mas is what we're about to get to. But good question. So let's keep going. So we just covered all of the Godan verbs. Now, before we mix in these irregular verbs, let's practice a little bit. I'm going to give you the verb, and I would like you to change it to the stem. Okay? I'll give you a verb. Please change it to the stem. Now, if it's a verb that ends in ru, I will write a little 1 or a 5 next to it, letting you know, oh, it's an Ichidan verb or it's a Godan verb. Okay? So a lot of the verbs are ones we just talked about. So hopefully they're still fresh in your mind. Hanasu, to talk, to speak. How do we make the stem form of this? How do we type it? Again, hiragana is fine, romaji is fine, whatever you've got available. Hanasu becomes hanashi. Thank you. How about if you are calling someone, if you're saying, hey, over there, yobu. What's the stem form? Yobi. Yeah, you can hear that E sound. You can hear that E sound coming in. What if you are drawing something on a piece of paper? Kaku. Maybe you're drawing these characters right now as we practice. I don't see Angel in here, but see if I can help them afterwards. Okay, Kaki. What about if we're switching over to Kiku, to listen? Kiki. Okay, how about taberu? Now, taberu is an Ichidan verb. What do we do with the Ichidan verbs? Tabe, sure. And how about, let's do the ones we just talked about. Kiru, to cut, which is the Godan version. Kiri, thank you. And if we're talking about putting on clothing, Kiru, the Ichidan version, what would it be? Yeah, just ki. It sounds strange by itself because you typically don't use stems by themselves. They're used to build other things. Now, I haven't forgotten the word I mentioned before, or someone else mentioned. Shinu, to die. Shini. Now, you might be wondering, especially if you've done the conjugation practices inside of Renshu, you'll notice that shinu comes up a lot. And you're wondering, is Renshu trying to tell me something? The answer is no. Interestingly, shinu is the only Japanese word in modern Japanese, it's used nowadays, that ends in nu. So, because it ends that way, it has its own way of being conjugated, and so it doesn't, you can't say, well, I prefer something, more positive. There's just not another one. So shinu's gonna come up because it ends in that nu, and you just have to remember it that way. Hopefully, it's not one that you have to deal with too often, unless you're my son, who we're playing Pokemon on the Switch right now, in the past few days, and I can't get it into his head that Pokemon don't die. They just, pass out or faint. So every day he says repeatedly, "Oh, that Pokemon Shinimashita, it died." I'm like, no, 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 they don't die. they just kind of pass out. So anyway, it will come up. So let's jump into our two irregular verbs. One of them is suru, and with suru, it's not, you don't just drop the end like we've done up until this point. With suru, you drop the entire verb. It just disappears, and you replace it with shi. Kuru, to come, is the same way. You drop the entire kuru, and it becomes ki. Now you might say, oh, special cases, I hate those. But you see suru and kuru so often because we're always talking about doing things and coming to places that it's going to stick in your head really quickly. So those are the only two irregular verbs in the entire language. That's it. There's none of this, read, read business where they're spelled the same way but they mean different things. It's just suru and kuru are special. That's it. Now, we spent enough time talking about verb stems. We can't really do much with verb stems by themselves. So let's actually make verbs with them. Now, again, we're sticking with polite, and we're going to talk about the positive and negative forms. Now, you'll notice here, I'm going to read what it says on Renshu. The first form is the mas form, or the polite non-past form. And depending on the textbook, you'll hear it mentioned in different ways. Sometimes they'll call it the mas form. Sometimes they'll call it the present form. That's not actually correct. Now, non-past sounds kind of strange, I bet, if it's your first time hearing it. And that's because there's no true future tense in Japanese. Again, this actually kind of makes things easier, I feel. So in English, you can say something like, I eat, I ate, I will eat. Three different forms. With Japanese, there's only two. If you were to force to translate it, it would be I eat or I ate. And what we usually consider the present tense is the non-past, which means it's sometimes present, it's sometimes future. You might think, well, that's confusing. Why isn't that ambiguous? I have one form. How do I tell if it's present or if it's, future? Fortunately, when you're in an actual conversation, people don't speak this way. People don't say, I eat, and then nothing else. They will say, I'll eat lunch at, a restaurant. And at the current time that you're talking, it's the morning. So if you say, I eat lunch at the restaurant, then you say, oh, it's in the future, because they're talking about something that hasn't happened yet. And so future in Japanese is defined by context. If you say tomorrow, you're talking about the future. If you say after I finish this, you're talking about the future. But the verbs don't get all messy with that. So we're sticking with the polite non-past form. All you have to do is take the stem that we just talked about and you slap that mas onto the end of it. And that's it. You have a verb. So check this out. Taberu, it's our Ichidan. We drop that root, and then we just stick mas on the end. And so this eat, it covers all the different subjects you could possibly think of. It can be I eat. It can be he eats. It can be they eat. It can be we eat. It can be you eat. It's all the same tabemasu. It's great. This is where things get easier. There's no subject-verb agreement that you have to think about. Now, I will point out, please listen to what the way I say it. I think I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Listen to me pronounce it one more time. Tabemasu. And once more. Tabemasu. What sounds off to you? For those of you that don't know, if you look at the characters on the screen, tabemasu, and you hear what I said, tabemasu, what sounds different? Yes, the U or the U is silent. And it happens in different spots, and we can't really talk about all of it in today's lesson. But typically, with these mas forms, you don't hear teachers say masu. Today, we're going to talk about the masu form. It's mas. The U just kind of drops off the end of it. And you actually hear that happening with the U sound a lot in different Japanese words. Very similarly, most people, when they say ski, as in I like you, ski da yo, they don't say suki, they say ski. And so that U often gets dropped out. No, it doesn't only happen because of ski, and it's not wrong, not in the least. This is a natural thing that happens inside of the language. You will hear people saying masu sometimes, but it's usually in, as I've seen it, in two different situations. Songs often use it. You might guess that songs use it because songs often need to keep a specific beat or rhythm to their songs. And so they often don't say, in some songs, they might not say, I eat. They might say, I eat, because they need that extra syllable at the end or whatever. And so you might hear those extra enunciated sounds in songs. Also, in more formal situations, you'll hear it. So if I hear someone just saying thank you, they might say arigatou gozaimasu, gozaimasu, natsus. But if you are maybe going to a store and you're buying a car, for example, they might say arigatou gozaimasu, and they hit that su much harder. So you hear both of them. They're both completely natural. But in most situations, you're not going to be saying that u sound. So it's just going to end tabemasu. Or ireru, to put something in somewhere else, like to put something into a box. Ireru, iremasu. Drop that ru and the mas. Now let's switch over to the Godan. Kaku. Earlier, you all told me it was kaki. So there's the kaki right there. And then mas. Kakimasu. Kaku, kakimasu. I write, he writes, she writes, we write. Ao, aimasu. Now here's the irregular one. Suru, remember we just dropped suru. We're like, suru, get out of there. We dropped suru entirely, we replace it with shi. So, shimasu. I do. He does. She does. They do. And similarly, kuru becomes kimasu. And that's it. Like that's everything for doing one of the most commonly used conjugation forms in Japanese. You're going to hear the mas form. If you live in Japan, you'll hear 1,000 times a day, if not more. It's everywhere. And this is the positive non-past form. Let's practice a little bit. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to first, well, you'll pick it up. We'll start off easy and we'll get a little bit harder. To start off, I will give you the verb. Please give me the mas form. Okay? I'll give you the verb. Please give me the mas form. Matsu. What would the mas form be here? All people are typing. You all seem to know how things go, but as I've said before, I love it when multiple people type the same answer. You shouldn't say, oh, someone else got to it first, I'm not going to do it. If you started typing, you should finish typing. Getting that out of your fingers and onto the keyboard, that's one more step that's tying that information into your head. Okay, let's switch up gears. Let's do stand up. Tatsu. Tachimasu. How about if you're going shopping? Kao. Looking good, looking good. How about if you're my son and you're playing Pokemon? Shinu. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Pokemon mechanics, but it always comes up when he's trying to catch a new Pokemon. And his attack is just a bit too strong. And he's like, Shinimashita, they died. Okay, how about Suru? Suru, that's that special one. It's got that special case. Shimasu. Right, right, right. Okay, here's a hard one. Kiru as in to cut. Kiru as in to cut. See a few different answers, but kirimasu. And if you're having a hard time remembering that, this mnemonic just popped into my head. Kiru, to cut, is the Godan. Why? Because you cut one thing into many things. You would cut it up into 5 pieces. Because you're cut, making a bunch of pieces. That's why it's Godan. Maybe that'll help you. Maybe not. Okay, let's try a few more. Neru. Now, I'll tell you, we haven't talked about neru is an Ichidan. Ichidan verb. To sleep. Neru. Good. Nemasu. Just in case if there's anyone that's jumped in here and wondering why the next lesson hasn't started, we'll be getting started soon. We're running a bit late today. Okay, let's finish up the lesson. We have a bit more. Now, this is nice. You know, in English, you do something like this. You say, I eat, and I don't eat. And then it gets confusing because then you say, well, okay, if it's he, then it's he doesn't eat. Why does eat change when it's positive, but it's not eat, it's do or don't? Why does that change when it's negative? It's a mess. In Japanese, much easier. Mas is for the positive, masen is for the negative. The way you make it is exactly the same. So, taberu is tabemasen. Kaku, kakemasen. Suru, our irregular verb, is shimasen. Now, let's practice a little bit more. Again, the goal of this practice is not to have you remember everything if it's your first time diving into this. If you're thinking, I'm just barely treading water, you know, that's okay. You're fine. You're not behind. I'm going to give you, we're going to bump it up a level. I'm going to give you the English. Please give me the Japanese. Paying attention to if it's positive or negative. Now, subjects don't matter, so I'm not going to put the subject. I'm just going to put the verb. Okay? Reads. I read, he reads, she reads. Now I'm sticking to pretty basic verbs, but there might be some that you don't know. And if not, then you can use this as a chance to learn them. So thank you, everyone. The base form is yomu, so yomimasu. Now let's make it easy. Let's do the opposite. Don't read. Right, as long as you've got those stems, it's really easy to switch back and forth between the two. Yomimasu, yomimasen. Sure. How about if you are... Actually, I am going to put the subject in there. I listen. Kikimasu. And like my son, whenever I'm trying to tell him that Pokemon don't die, they just pass out. They're just taking a little nap. He doesn't listen. Kikimasen. Good, good. And surely there's some of you. Don't do. Now, Pokemon, you don't have to put that in. But don't do. What's the negative form of do? It's actually on the screen. Still on the screen if you need it. Shimasen. And let's do one more. I'm sure there's someone that wanted to come to today's event, but they couldn't. So they... Now, we have in the past tense. So I'm going to stick to present tense. They don't come. You know, it's actually they didn't come, but let's say don't come. What's the negative form of come? Kimasen. Good. Now, we're about to wrap the lesson up. I just wanted to point out a few more things. So, you know, we've been doing that wa bides pattern up until now. And the awa stays the same, but this is where you can start dropping in those sentences. So you can say something like, Watashi wa tabemasu. Now, saying I eat is a little overly simple because you'd probably not say that. You'd say, I'm going to eat, or, you know, actually, I'm going to eat is the same sentence because it could be future tense. Or you usually say, I eat pizza, or I ate this yesterday, or whatever. And, you know, the temptation is super strong to want to try and speak at the same level that you're at in your native language. And it's really hard to do that when you're picking up a new language. So we're going to start simple. And then we're going to slowly, basically, if this is our pizza, I love pizza. If this is our pizza, we will be adding toppings to change it from a very simple pizza to one that's more to our liking. So, watashi wa tabemasu means I eat. Kare, which is he. Kare wa kakimasu, you know, he writes. And then when we get to what is he writing, where is he writing, with whom is he writing, all that stuff, we're going to get to that bit by bit. So don't worry. Now, before we end things, this information might be stale by the time you read this, but for now, for those of you that are here, this will help you. Inside of Renshu, if you go into the lesson center, it actually very soon will not be called the lesson center anymore. It's not going anywhere, but it's still here. It's going to be called community lists because it's more lists and less lessons. Up here at the top, there's something that says verb conjugations. If you just tap this, you'll see we've got the verb conjugations down here. And oh, hey, polite present. This is what we just did. The polite present is here. And then the polite present negative is right down here. And you can study these here, and it will just throw a whole bunch of verbs at you, and you can practice going from the regular version to the conjugated version, going from conjugated back to regular, you know, whatever works for you. So these are available if you're interested in using them. Otherwise, we are done today. Thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, this will be available in various spots in the Discord, in Renshu, and on our little tiny hidden YouTube channel. So feel free to check them out if you'd like to in the future. Thank you again, and hopefully you join us next week. We are going to start adding, I believe, particles those mystical particles that terrify people. We're going to de-terrify them. They're not going to be scary when we're done with them. We'll be jumping into those next time. So, hope you join us then. Thank you.